Then he, Jesus, appeared to over 500 brothers at one time. Okay? And we'll talk about this idea of a mass hallucination in just a minute. Now, the guards assigned to protect the tomb from any tampering witnessed an earthquake and angels coming down. This was reported by the guards, and then the guards we know were bribed to tell a different story. And we can find that in Matthew 28, verses 2 and 4. So what witnesses matter? Why does it matter? Just like in a court of law, witnesses were there and can attest to the truth. So one of the neat things, and we don't have to do it now, but I'll show you quickly how these codes right here. So we can listen to an eminent scholar, Dr. Gary Habermas, explain the evidence that even skeptics agree to. Now, I'm going to pull this aside real quick. I'm going to show you this first one right here is a 5-minute summary. Okay, pretty much if you took your phone and this is what would pull up. And
evidence in support of the resurrection. These are facts, these are historical facts, and this is what we specialize in. So
I start with what I call a minimal facts argument. It's a species of reliability, one of the reliability arguments, but where most reliability arguments are top-down arguments. If the book is reliable, it's like an umbrella. Everything under it gets kept, from the rain. If the book is generally true, whatever's reported under it is accurate. Mine's a bottom-up. And instead of an umbrella, I would suggest an example of a brick wall, with individual facts being bricks that we put together to build a case from the bottom up. And I've used anywhere from 3 to 7 over the years. Lately I've been doing 6. And I would say, Jesus died by crucifixion. His disciples had experiences that they believe were appearances of the risen Jesus. Because of their belief that he was raised, it is the event that has turned the world upside down religiously. In fact, a recent book on non-believing Jews in the resurrection, they even acknowledge, not being Christians, that Christianity is a resurrection religion. It was the resurrection that powered the religion, powered the teachings, even to the point of being willing to die. And we do have first century sources for arguably the 3 largest names in Christianity. 4, very important, it was proclaimed very early. And today, critics, the consensus position is that you can track the resurrection preaching back to immediately after the cross. In fact, the way it's often stated by saying Bart Ehrman is that when Paul said yes to Jesus on the way to Damascus, there was already a body of data called the early creeds.
And we read that early creed in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8. So that is the 5-minute summary. So if you're talking to someone and you're like, hey, you got just a couple 5 minutes to just listen to a professor talk about this, and they're like, yeah, sure. Then they can scan that. Or if you're like, hey, you want something even more in depth to give data, like upon data upon data, you can have the person scan this next one right here, and QR code, and it's a.
I think there's no other person is held down as the cornerstone of this conference.
Have you ever been a reporter or a journalist? You know the importance of early eyewitness data. And you can have one without the other. You can have an early report that's hearsay.
So he talks about data. That's about a 50-minute, hour-long, discussion, and so that's really cool. So and actually, I find it quite fascinating, and so I would love to, I continually watch this. But you can, suggest that, hey, let's watch this short one together, let's watch this long one together, and let's just discuss. Now, the next thing after he talks about eyewitnesses, the next concept that Dr. Gary Habermas, and he gave me permission to use these links and this information, and is the fact of life transformation. In life transformation, we move from skeptics to believers. James thought Jesus was crazy. We can confirm that in Mark 3:21. He experienced the resurrected Jesus and believed. He became one of the cornerstone leaders in the early church in Jerusalem. Saul, who we call Paul, and there's a fascinating, details behind his name, but he went from persecutor to proclaimer. Wow! How amazing would that be if Bart Ehrman believes the truth of the amazing knowledge that he has of Greek, ancient Greek, and he sees how it's all true. How amazing would that be, going from atheist to proclaimer of the Lord? That would be something, amazing, I think. And then, of course, Thomas. I love the fact that there's a Thomas in there, because sometimes we do doubt. But even Thomas, skeptical and doubted. And then he experienced the resurrected Jesus, and what did he say? My Lord and my God. Wow. So then, of course, that leads into the birth of the church. There was an undeniable truth that started an unstoppable movement. Preaching the resurrection in Jerusalem could easily have been refuted if it did not happen, right? We see that with Peter in Acts, when they're in the synagogue, not synagogue, but the temple. And then the unstoppable movement, 2,000 years, it has been going and going. So the truth about the resurrection could not be stopped, and the church grew and grew and grew, and it's still on fire today, and we can see that through Acts 1, 6, 9, 16, and just look around us today. Then on the back, we can have this information. Have questions, contact us. That QR code leads right here to our website. So that's kind of cool. And then, hey, invite them. Come to church. All right. So that's the idea behind this one. And so the historical argument is eyewitness reliability, the transformation of disciples, and the flourishing of an unstoppable movement. Now, the idea of witnesses is important because without it, we don't even have a legal profession in the United States. It's a key foundation in the court system today. Now, let's go about, so let's say, accept these as facts, but I got some, I don't know, I just don't agree with some of this stuff. So let's now look at some myths that might pop up, some objections. I have objections, Your Honor. And so someone, so I threw this out there. The resurrection, greatest story ever, or a hoax, right? Well, that's the idea. Let's go ahead and gauge those things. So in the first insight fold, we're going to talk about the hallucinations theory, the stolen body theory, and the deception by disciples. These were all the main theories, and they keep kind of resurrecting every so often. When skeptics, critical scholars, atheists say, okay, let me come up with a solution. Here's what really happened. And they might say, stolen body theory, right? Someone stole the body. Okay, well, the disciples were scared and confused. How do we know that? Because before they met the resurrected Jesus, at the end of Luke, right? We know in Luke chapter 20. Let me see. No, John. I apologize. Yes. John 20:19, I think it is. Is it? Yep. Okay. Oh yes, 20:19, John 20:19. In the evening of that first day of the week, we're talking about the third day, right? That Sunday. The disciples were gathered together with the doors locked because of their fear of the Jews. They just saw what happened with Jesus. They were still afraid. They haven't experienced the resurrected Jesus. They heard a report, but they haven't experienced him. And so they're scared. There is no way that they were going to just walk up to a group of, soldiers. Excuse me, just make way and help me hold this open, and we're going to steal the body. That would not have happened. Okay, so there's no time even to plan a corpse heist. Some with the gardener, or same thing with the gardener, when they talked to the gardener. The women were like, where's my Lord? What'd you do with him? They were confused, right? So they could not have eaten. There was no evidence that they stole a body, right? And so there would have been no way to get past the guards without being caught. The guards have one duty. They're going to do this duty so they can get off and work and go back. If someone messes with their duty, you meet the end of a Roman spear. It's just pretty simple. And in that time of day. Now, next thing